Right, I think most folks have joined us, so I'm going to say hello and welcome. I'm Melissa Rivard, Director of Engagement Strategies at the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. And we are so delighted to have you all here with us today for this webinar called Science by Design, a new tool to incorporate science and lived experience into early childhood program design. Whether you are joining us for the first time or you've been a regular on our webinars here at the center, we're just so thrilled to have you here with us today. Today's webinar is focused on the Science by Design module, which the center launched in August. It's an open access, self-paced learning experience designed to support improved outcomes for children and their caregivers. So what we sought to do with this resource is to empower service providers in fields like healthcare, education, child welfare, and others that intersect with early childhood to strengthen and improve their services for young children and their families in ways that are grounded in the science. The module offers curated information on 3 design principles informed by the science of early childhood development and guides users through an interactive process of learning, listening, and synthesis to identify opportunities to adapt their programs and services in ways that support the healthy development of young children and the well-being of their caregivers. We're going to share a link to the Science by Design module in the chat now, so you'll all be able to check that out. And speaking of chat, we want to let you know that the participants in today's webinar won't be able to post in chat due to the size of our audience, but we not only welcome, but we encourage you to use the reactions to let us know how you're feeling out there. And we want to thank those of you who submitted questions for our panel when you registered for this event. More than 100 questions were submitted, and many of which we'll be addressing throughout the conversation. We used your questions to shape the overview of the module that we'll be providing. So hopefully that will address many of the questions that you had. And the questions that you submitted have also informed the content of the panel discussion. We're also hoping that you will share your feedback about today's discussion in a brief survey, which I'll be back to share before we conclude the webinar. So please stay on if you can for that. And if you're interested in listening to this webinar in Spanish, we do have a Spanish language channel, and instructions for accessing that will be posted in the chat as well. And we also have live closed captioning enabled. So if you are interested in that functionality, you can turn that on at any time. And without further ado, I'll introduce our presenter, moderator, and panelists in order of their appearance. You'll see links to everyone's bio in the chat, so I'm going to keep my introductions brief. Susan Crowley, a senior project manager at the Center on the Developing Child, led the team that developed the Science by Design module, and she will be presenting a brief overview of it to orient us and provide some helpful context for the panel discussion. Our moderator today is Jason Gortney, Chief Program and Innovation Officer at Mary's Place in Seattle, Washington. Jason was instrumental in the early development of the Science by Design framework that the module is based on. And he will be joined by our panelists, Zoe Bill, who is Director of Youth Services at Mary's Place in Seattle, Washington. Kay Connors, who's an instructor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Maryland School of Medicine and Executive Director of the Tagi Madarasi Center for Infant Study and the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Demira Tullis is Youth Services Lead, also at Mary's Place in Seattle, Washington. And Delisa Worthy is a Program Administrator in the Office of Early Childhood, Primary Behavioral Health, and Early Intervention Behavioral Health Administration at the Maryland Department of Health. Zoe and Demira work together at Mary's Place, and Kay and Delisa collaborate on a community-based federal grant called Maryland Linking Action to Unmet Needs in Children's Health in Baltimore, Maryland. Zoe K, Demira, and Delisa were all early users of the module, which is why we invited them to share their experiences with you today. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Susan Crowley to provide an overview of the Science by Design module. So take it away, Susan.
Thanks, Melissa. And hi, friends in the early childhood space. I'm going to provide a brief overview of this model, just to give you some context so that it makes more sense as the panelists are discussing their experience with the model. So, who was this designed for? It was designed for teams of providers of services to pregnant people, young children, and by young children, we typically are referring to birth to 3 years old, and their families. So it's developed for both US audiences, US users, and international users. At this point, it's available in English. What problem does it solve? So we noticed that there was a demand for support by providers were looking for support in a process that helped them reflect on their services and adapt their services in order to get to better outcomes for children, sort of an off-the-shelf offering that they could use. So we built this model, Science by Design. Okay, so you're probably wondering at this point, well, what is this model? So we can go to the next slide and I'll tell you. So Science by Design is a three-pronged approach or three perspectives brought together in one package. So first of all, we're looking at the science of early childhood development. So what is the science telling us? And then we go and talk to staff who are providing the direct services and the leaders in those organizations. So drawing on that wisdom of what they're observing as they're providing services. And then thirdly, we go and listen to the voice of families or folks who are users of the services, getting that lived experience perspective. And in this model, we call that population key involved parties. So that's kind of a quick overview of what the model looks like, what it entails. So how does it work? Here we go. So it's done by teams of providers. One of those team members would be acting as the facilitator to sort of guide the team through the process. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks to complete at about 1 to 3 hours per week. It is the module itself, which is online. And then there are some additional resources or resources for the team to use. So there's a facilitator guide for that facilitator role. There's a team workbook. There's a case study that's woven throughout the module to provide examples of what the activities look like. And then there's a resource guide for anyone who wants a deeper dive into any topic. So it's a hybrid model. Some of the work is done asynchronously by individual team members on their own. And then the team also gets together to discuss the content and do the activities together. So it's a free and open access offering on our website, on the center's website, and you'll see the link in the chat. Excuse me. And it's made in, it is organized in 4 different units. So unit 1 is the science of early childhood development. So I like to think of this as Science 101. And this is we can go to the next slide. This is a curated but comprehensive compilation of the latest science-informed understanding of early childhood development. So it covers a whole range of topics related to child development, including things like the importance of the environment that a child is developing in, heterogeneity, adversity, resilience, all kinds of topics, drawing from many, many, many different types of sciences. So to answer one of the respondents' questions, is neuroscience connected? Yes, neuroscience is part of the science that we look at. So this module wraps up with these 3 design principles that you see on the screen here. So they are, and these are principles that are drawn from all these different types of science. And what they do is they make the science actionable. So the things that we want providers to think about is how are we supporting responsive relationships? How are we reducing sources of significant stress? How are we strengthening adaptive skills in context? So this unit is a mix of reading material on the module. There are videos to watch. There are knowledge checks. and then links to papers for more information. So that's Unit 1. Unit 2 is the moment where we gather the perspective of providers of services. So this is applying the 3 principles to your program. So this is a 2-step process. The first thing the team does is sits down and reflects on all the services that they provide. And generally what they do is pick one to go through this process and hold in mind. And we call that the unit of focus. The second step in this unit is to do this tool that you see in front of you on the slide. This is the Science by Design matrix. So the unit of focus that the team identified in the upper left-hand corner is where they start. And then they look at each of the design principles that I just went through. Those are the 3 columns that you see. And so for example, the first principle, reducing sources of significant stress, the team thinks about how do we see this principle currently reflected in our program and services? So how do we reduce sources of stress for families? And then the second part of it is, do we see any way that our program or services may counteract this principle? Any ways that we could be in more alignment with the principle? So that's the second unit. And then the third unit is the fun time, I think. This is when you go and talk to families. So there's 3 steps in this process. The first step is to develop a feedback guide. So basically, this is an opportunity to listen to families' needs and desires for their children. So a feedback guide just provides some structure to the conversation. And this screenshot on the left-hand side of the screen is the template, but then it's populated with a case study so that you can see throughout the module, we're providing instructions on how to do something, and then we use the case study to kind of bring it to life. So that's the first part, develop the feedback guide. The second part is to actually conduct the feedback sessions. So these can be anything from a one-on-one conversation with a family member to a focus group with a couple of families. And then the third and final part of this unit is to analyze all the data, all the information that you've gathered from families, and make sense of it and pull out the themes. So for example, you want to get the insights that you're learning from the families, and insights are kind of the reason behind why people think and say what they say. So that's the third unit. And then the fourth and final unit is putting it all together. So this is the team sits down again and says, okay, what was relevant in the science? What really struck us about the science in Unit 1? What did we learn when we reflected on our own practice in Unit 2? And then what did we hear from families? What is top of mind for our families? They put all of that together, again, in a structured format in this unit. And then they land on what I like to call the sweet spot, the part in the middle where there's a light bulb flashing. And that is the design opportunity. So this is a moment where you have an agenda for change, so to speak, that's informed by science, by staff, and by families. So that's kind of a really brief overview of the module. The next part we're going to do is hear from a couple folks who tested the model for us early on. I just have to say, Jason Gortney is a longtime collaborator with the Center on the Developing Child and a friend. And I'm just so delighted that he's here to moderate the panel. So Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, thanks, Susan. It's really fun to be back working with the center on this, and it's just really neat to see how this the Science by Design module has kind of blossomed over the years from a very modest beginning, I would say, that we were both there for. This next part is going to be a panel discussion. We are going to essentially just walk through those different units that Susan just described to kind of help people further understand kind of what each one is, and hear from some folks who have actually done these in real life, and just hear a little bit about what that experience was like from these two teams. So I'm really excited to welcome Zoe and Kay and Demira and Delisa from kind of two very different contexts. to share about kind of what you learned through this process. But before we jump into that, I'd like to give each team just a couple of minutes to share a little bit about your organization or your partnership, so that we can kind of ground the audience in understanding your context. So I'm going to invite Delisa to share a little bit about Project Launch, and also kind of how you decided to use the Science by Design module.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I'd like to start off just talking about what we have going on in Maryland. We are doing things a little bit different. And part of what we did coming together was to bring together the funder, which is me at the Behavioral Health Administration, and the program person as thought partners in this work. And this framework really helped us to bring together other partners that included parents and community members to really think about things through different lenses. We have had the great pleasure of having the Project Launch grant, and we've had it twice in Maryland. So originally, I was the first Project Launch director in 2012, and that was when we started to bring together this multidisciplinary team across state and local jurisdictions, and also our partners in the community. And so Kay and I have been thought partners for many years, and you'll hear today both my side as the funder and her side as the program person, and how we've been able to really work together and think this through. And I think us being able to use Science by Design really gave us a framework, gave us a way to think through things and work as a team. Kay, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Delisa. Yeah, I'm very privileged to get the chance to work with Delisa and to be here today. So thank you. I think Delisa explained our approach, and I think kind of some of the lessons that we learned out of the Science by Design, and how I'll talk a little bit later about how we're continue to apply them. But I think, so we're behavioral health folks, so that's the kind of, we come at it from that point of view. And what we learned by kind of going through the process was that behavioral health landscapes are kind of hard to wrap your hands around, and they are still kind of baked in a lot of stigma. So using the Science by Design method really helped us pull in parent and community members' perspectives, but also our own perspectives to think about parenting. And I think parenting really is a focus, and caregiving is a focus of the three principles. And so the model itself really helped us with leveling that rather complex behavioral health system and coming to a place where everybody can relate, which is we're all caregivers, and maybe if we're lucky, parents and grandparents.
Great, thanks so much. Zoe, can I invite you to just share a little bit about Mary's Place and kind of your team's role within Mary's Place, and a little about why you decided to use Science by Design.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, so I'll introduce Mary's Place. Also, thank you all for having us as well. We're happy to be here. Mary's Place, if you all don't know, is a homeless service agency. We work out of King County, Washington, which is the most populated county in Washington, and includes Seattle, which is better known than King County, but we work across the whole county. And on the next slide. Nice. And so a little bit about us as a homeless service agency is our mission is to ensure that no child sleeps outside by centering equity and opportunity for women and families. And our vision is a community where all families have safety, stability, and housing. And we do that through a three-pronged approach on the next slide. And this approach is really rooted in the community and seeing what they need. So we have our homeless prevention, which is making sure families stay in their hard-earned homes through rental assistance, and mobile outreach team. That's our team that works on the ground with families who cannot be in shelter. And I'll go into a little bit of the why there. And then we also have our emergency shelter, which is 3 emergency shelters across King County. So one is in Seattle and 2 in neighboring cities. And in this model, in our emergency shelter, we have what Jason has called, and I really like the way that he calls this, is the enhanced model of emergency shelter. And the reason why we make sure to say that it's an enhanced model is that's because that's what Demira and I do, is we work in youth services, which is program in emergency shelter. We work a little bit with outreach, a little bit with prevention, but most of where we're centered is in emergency shelter because we're working with the families who really have nowhere else to go. They don't have necessarily a family member or support or even a car or a tent to be in. And so it's really that last place. Next slide, I think. Hopefully. Oh yeah. So perfect. So our youth services model in shelter is 2 big buckets that we work in. So we do programming with the goal of reducing trauma of homelessness. We know that our families have often been through a lot before they get to us. And then also shelter itself is not the most conducive to child development. We try our best, but also always having your own room and your own space to be a kid is better than a place full of 200 people in a room where you're sharing with your infant sibling as well as maybe older. So our goal in that programming is to really give space for kids to be kids and to have developmentally appropriate learning, even just having adults that are important to them in that space, such as Demira at one of our sites. And so we do that through Tots Club, which is 0. So as soon as they are born, sometimes we even work with the pregnant folks all the way up until kindergarten. Kids Club is more our elementary age. Teen Club is middle and high school. And then we, of course, do family events and outings because parents deserve to have fun with their kids too. And the last bucket we do is resource connection. And so that's really that chunk of trying to say, okay, so you've experienced homelessness. Let's try to get rid of all those barriers so that this doesn't happen again. If the barrier was childcare, we can help you. If the barrier was making sure your kids are in school, we can help you. And so it's not just about the parents having that support, it's also the kids knowing that they'll be supported. And the biggest thing about resource connection is we try to give the parents the tools. We're just breaking down and letting them know what they are because we are with them such a short time. We really want them to learn how to do a lot of those on their own. So that's a little bit different piece of the resource connection. I will also add something that I haven't mentioned is we also run, as Mary's Place as a whole, we run the intake line for all of King County. So any family experiencing homelessness in King County calls one phone number, which is the one that we run, and tries to get into shelter. So this is backpedaling a little bit, but basically right now, after the pandemic, with some of the immigration changes that have been recent, and also just like the world having a lot of colonialism and things that are still alive and well, we're seeing huge amounts of people, families calling shelter and actually being eligible for shelter, which means they slept outside last night, either in a tent or a car, or with neither of those. We're seeing up to 40 to 60 families on the wait list each night. So when we say that we envision a world where kids are inside each night, I also want to state like that's not a wild belief. Right before 2020, we were actually accomplishing that. Anyone that called each night could have a place to stay that night, but now because of all the changes in the world, it's been a lot more difficult, and we still envision a world that can happen because we did it once. And that's part of also our view of Mary's Place as a whole and in youth services is we see like these kids, even though we know that sometimes the statistics are against them, things have been against them, we can teach them the tools to get back to what they deserve, which is to have housing, stability. And we do that, Demira and I especially do that through youth services because we know that the kids are most important in doing that. And then really quick, why science by design? So it's super important to us because we actually do have a pretty unique model in King County. There's not a lot of homeless providers that provide this enhanced model, and especially with the youth so intensely as we do. Demira is working 40 hours a week along with 9 other of our coworkers in these shelters to be with the kids and do programming up to 6 hours a day and resource connections. And it's hard to find professional development that makes sense for this realm, but Science by Design fit really neatly into that, in the fact that we could model it to what we needed, and also gave us just a chance to think through our programming and what we're doing, and is it really guest led, and is it really doing the best we can for the kids and for the caregivers that we work with.
All right, thanks so much for those introductions to your context and a little bit about why you decided to use Science by Design. So I'd like to just walk us through the different units of the module. The first one is really about grounding in those three principles that that Susan shared at the beginning. So Kay, you shared a little bit about this in your intro, but is there anything more you want to say about kind of what the experience was like of just you know, having these three principles be something that your team learned about together and thought about together as you were getting started?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So I would say they really, in the video, I think they call themselves a guiding star. And I think for us, they've also been a compass, because to navigate that behavioral health landscape in early childhood in particular is a wonderful opportunity, but also challenging. So finding parents and kids where they show up in primary care through our Healthy Step sites. We do have an outpatient mental health clinic, but also in early care and education settings, and also in the community, like in rec centers or different places where we're really trying to find families in places where they feel comfortable having these conversations. So I think one practical thing that's happened is that whenever we start new relationships, we often do use things like the video and most often the brain architecture game, which is a really engaging way to get at that science, and start building relationships. So that's been kind of true in the different places we pop up. Um, and then the other modules really helped us, the ones about building skills is kind of really what, and responsive relationships is where we kind of honed in on these parent programs, because parent programs can be delivered anywhere. They don't have to be clinical, like a therapy group per se. And that's what kind of helped us kind of move towards always also including things like something called the Parent Cafe, which is really focused on parent resilience.
That's great. Thank you very much. Demira, can you share a little bit about what your team's experience and sort of that first initial part of just kind of learning those three principles together and thinking about that together?
Yeah, of course. So first and foremost, I learned that a lot of the initial work that we do aligns with the three Science by Design principles. Learning about the principles in Unit 1 allowed me to reflect on our program and the work that we do. It gave me a sense of affirmation, especially when thinking about both building responsive relationships and reducing sources of stress. So working at a family shelter, I think our priority is always removing a source of stress in some way. Our guests are coming to us with their basic need for shelter not being met, and with that comes many other stressors. So this unit helped me not only think about those stressors, but call them out and look for tools to address them. We were also able to see how having the option of a consistent and safe environment for our kids to explore and play was a stress reliever within itself for our families. And so, as for building responsive relationships, I think this is something that we have always done especially well. Working at a family shelter, we're working with children and their families who are actively living through their trauma. So the principle of building responsive relationships made me pause and think about the way that I show up for the kids each and every day. Typically, we as in the youth service staff are the first people to meet families. So right off the bat, I want to embody the characteristics needed to build those responsive relationships and ultimately gain their trust. I also felt as though this unit served as a tool for professional development for our youth service staff, because although we know a good amount when it comes to working with that 0 to 5 age group, we're not an early childhood facility. So we use this unit as a form of training as well. And it allowed us to build our skill set and explore ways we can meet the needs of the kids in every interaction and exchange that we have with them.
Thank you. That's really cool. And I can attest to firsthand experience of that relationship, responsive relationship building that your team does. It's cool to see. So let's move to the next unit in the module, which is that matrix that Susan shared earlier. So the idea there is you've got these three principles, and then you have a structured process where you are looking for places where you're already seeing alignment. And Demira just talked about places where, wow, we looked at that and we we're like, yeah, we're really well aligned with some of these things. But you also are prompted to look for places where maybe you're misaligned, or maybe you are see an opportunity where like, oh, if we made this change, we would be more in alignment there. So let's hear a little bit about your experience with those. And Zoe, I'm going to start with you. And if you could share a little bit about what that was like going through the matrix process.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of what Demira said feeds into this too. I think we had a really great time having that tool and having it simplified, and the fact that we could just really like look into each one and see where we align, where we misalign. And I think it was also like just having that space to do that, because I think working in shelter, one thing that's important to know is we're often dealing with crisis and running from one thing to the next. And the really cool thing about this module is it gave us time to reset and think like, okay, what are we doing? How does it do well for the families, and how could we do better? And a lot of what Demira said, like, it felt really great to have our staff look through it and be like, okay, we are doing so good in building responsive relationships. We're doing so good in reducing sources of stress. We're even doing well in strengthening core skills in some of our families, but not in others. And that's where I think we saw the most room for growth, was strengthening those core skills, because a lot of it was that nature in that space of not having the time to lesson plan, or even to get professional development that made sense for a 4-year-old that's preschool, as well as an infant that is just needing their basic needs met. So having that space to really like write that down and have it clearly defined was really helpful. And that's, yeah, definitely where we saw the most. And we'll talk a little bit more later about what we decided to do with that. But our biggest room for growth was definitely in strengthening core skills for our toddlers while they were in programming.
That's great. Thank you. So let's move on to the kind of unit 3, which, as we heard earlier, is about really checking in with the people that you're trying to be helpful to. So either a focus group or a structured interview with parents, caregivers of young children, whoever is kind of the intended recipient of your services or your project. And really trying to learn from them, like, what are their needs in their own words? What are they hoping for? What are the things that they see as would be most supportive of them in their journey to parent or take care of young children? So with that in mind, I'd like to just kind of hear what that experience was like, and anything that you learned in going through that process. And I do want to just make a quick note that we had a question from a registrant in Haiti that was submitted before the webinar, who asked about any strategies that you may have around empowering caregivers. So this seems like kind of the place where you might say something about that. So Demira, can you kick us off with this question?
Yeah, of course. So I want to start off by saying that I really loved this feature in the module because it gave us the opportunity to hold space for our caregivers and to really think about their needs and their kids' needs. And so it was really awesome listening to the answers that they had to our questions and just having those conversations in general. And so the questions that we asked during our stakeholder interviews were centered around what we could do to build trust with our guests and what changes or additions they felt we needed to make to our program. And for example, we had a couple families comment on the timing of our program and how changing the time would make it more accessible to them. And so this was just one example, but we took their responses and just made small changes to our program in ways that we could to meet their needs. And so as for making our guests feel empowered, I believe that we made them feel that way just by holding that space and allowing them to have some buy-in on the experiences that their kids have while they're spending some time with us. And so I would say that I wish that we could have given our interview process just a little bit more time, just so that we could really slow down and give it the level of importance that it deserved. There were times when it did feel a little bit rushed on my end due to time constraints and meeting personal deadlines and just working with our guests and their availability. They're fairly busy, but even still, I think that there was so much good that came from this unit. We would not have had the opportunity to get the feedback that we received had we not have held those interviews. And so the interviews made us aware of even the smallest changes that we didn't know that we needed to make.
Yeah, thanks so much, Demira. I do think just in many years in human services and working in lots of different programs, I think this is such an important piece of how we should be designing our programs, or maybe redesigning and rethinking our programs, is actually talk to the people that we're trying to be helpful to, and hear what they have to say, because you can really learn a lot from that. And I think it wasn't always kind of the first thing that came to mind for people. I think we're getting better at it in the field of checking in with folks who have lived experience and involving them in design. But I really want to just put an exclamation point on this part of the module, this unit, because I think it's so important. Delisa, can you share a little bit about project launches, kind of experience with this part of the module?
Absolutely. Kay, did you want to say something? I saw you were leaning forward. I saw your
I
cue.
just wanted to punctuate what Jason was saying, is that that's really what we learned through this process. Is provider people like me always want to, be the provider, but what we really learned is that partners and parents really value lived experience. And so we really went from that process, learned to pick models where you didn't have to be a licensed mental health professional to deliver the services.
I think that's really important, Kay. And what it makes me think about, I'm thinking about the question that you asked from the person from Haiti about empowerment. And it makes me think about how this helped us really hone empowerment through voice, right? So as a part of our project launch, both project launch number 1 and now project launch number 2, B launch, we have something called the Young Child Wellness Council. And so our Young Child Wellness Council is going to be a part of our Early Childhood Mental Health Steering Committee. And so this is a great way that we are bringing together state agencies, right? So our focus is a little bit different in that we're looking at state agencies, but we're also looking at a pilot project. And we're also really wanting to give voice to those people that we serve. And so what we learned in project launch number 1 was that if you're going to have focus groups, people like me, the funder, and the director should not be in the room. So we learned that the hard way the first time, just by really noticing how much people did not talk when there were certain people in the room. And so really having this tool helps us to understand how we can include folks, right? And so as a part of our Young Child Wellness Council, there'll be a person like me from the state, there'll be a local person, but there'll also be a community person. And that trio, I think, is an important part of hearing all voices and having people in the state, funders in particular, hear what people who are receiving the services that we're trying to design, how they really feel about it. We've also now integrated that as a part of our Early Childhood Mental Health Steering Committee by actually having a parent who is a part of our team, and what we had to do to make sure she felt comfortable, right? So really looking at, by using the tool, looking at our misalignments in some ways, right? If you're having a meeting at 9 a.m. and you're expecting parents to be there, if they're working parents, how are they supposed to be there, right? Or there are times when her baby needs to be on screen with us. And how are we welcoming to her so that she can be present even if she has a young child that needs attention? And what kind of early childhood people would we be if we didn't help her to feel, comfortable to do what she needs to do for her child while helping in this important system? And so I think really looking at our alignments in terms of having parents involved, having partners involved in the community. We have a very important partner, Thriving Community Collaborative, that is a really important voice in the work that we're doing. And so this system has really facilitated us looking at it. And I think looking at the alignments was great, but I think seeing the misalignments was also really important. And what we learned about the misalignments, especially empowerment through the voice of fathers and male caregivers in particular, and really that showing up for us. Although we have really tried, right, given it our best shot to have fathers involved and included it in the grants that we write, include funding for fatherhood, but really still seeing that there is a misalignment for us in having male voice through the partners that are in our meetings, through the voices of actually hearing fathers and then meeting the needs of fathers.
Thank you. Those are some really powerful insights just around in how to include people, being aware of power dynamics, thinking about those that may have traditionally not been as centered like fathers. So I really appreciate the thinking that your team has done around that. So I'm going to move us to the last of the 4 units, which is around kind of taking all of the inputs. So if you think back to Susan's kind of Venn diagram of the 3 circles, you've got the research, you've got the perspective of your participants, you have your staff or your team have looked at kind of your practice, your plans through the lens of those 3 principles and identified areas of alignment and opportunity. And you're asked to kind of take all of that and think about, okay, what changes might you make as a result of those insights that were kind of surfaced, and then especially paying attention to places where the science, the practitioner, and the family view sort of overlaps, like that sweet spot that Susan talked about. So I'm going to ask Zoe to share a little bit about the youth services team's experience with that, and then we'll go to project launch after that.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, bringing it all together was great. Like having everything that we saw and having real action steps was really helpful. I think we so often go into things and learn a lot and then don't put in a specific action steps. So it was really nice to have those action steps to follow through with. And one of the great things too is it also is in making the action steps, there's also pieces on like what tools do you need to do that. And that was really helpful as leadership too, to be like, okay, I can't just say add this extra thing. It was really, okay, to do this, what do we need? What are the pieces we're missing? And it made it a really good, helpful blueprint for us to follow. And so the things that we really focused on, like I said, there was a lot of that focusing on the strengthening core skills. So one of the ones we did there was we identified from that we need more professional development and we need to lesson plan for our TOTS club. And in that, I was able to like look out into the community and find things to bring to the team. And we even added circle time to help with our toddler to prepare for preschool. But of course we had to have a lesson planning and professional development to get there. And so we were able to do that. We also built on some of the things we were doing well by creating a 1-pager for families that communicate staff roles to build relationships between staff and families. We were seeing, yeah, we were building strong relationships, but then still there was like, wait, what do you guys do again? Wait, what can I get help with? Because we also are meeting them within 48 hours of entering shelter. So there's a lot going on when you first enter shelter, and there's a lot of focus on basic needs. And we're coming in like we can help with school and childcare and all of these things. So we created a 1-pager to simplify it. And a lot of that was for staff too. So as youth services, we're only 10 folks in an organization of about 250 folks. So being able to tell other staff what we could do so that they could share on their 24-hour shifts, thinking about like, we're not necessarily there at 8 a.m., but there's always a staff there that is and can help spread the word. So that was really helpful. And then the last thing, as Demira stated, is we did shift our times to later in the day because families asked for it and it made sense. And we saw a big influx of kids attending at a later start time. We were originally starting at 9 a.m., which was early, even though we were in their homes. A lot of times that's still like right after kids got on the bus or still getting on the bus. So giving them that time to feed their toddler and spend time. And now we have it consistent across all 3 of our sites 5 days a week for a few hours each day. So, yeah.
Thanks, Zoe. Kay, can you quickly share some of the plans that your team has made as a result?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So building on the success of Project Launch that Delisa led a couple years ago, and the experience of the lessons from the Science by Design work that we did, because it really gave a very helpful framework, an action-oriented framework. um, and launch stands for linking action with unmet needs in children's health. So we really wanted an action oriented approach to our grant. So we've built it into the Young Child Wellness Council as really one of the first activities that we'll also ask all members to do. And members are a wide range of folks, people that do promotion, like our public television station, parents. There's a parent is going to be a co-leader with Delisa, so state and local leaders, program people like me. So it's a wide range of voices, and we'll be actually using all the modules and the whole design to get us started. And so one, at a meta level, it will help us with meeting the needs of our grant, to link those unmet actions to unmet needs. And then we'll also ask if people are willing to do it at a more micro level within their own programs or communities or places where they're doing this work, and report back to us. Um, so it's really had a great influence on our thinking and our work. And I think having those three very drilled down principles really helps to help people understand what your intentions are, um, in this early childhood family work.
That's great. And I know that both of these teams did the process once, and now you're both planning to. In fact, our team at Mary's Place is kind of halfway through doing it again after doing it an initial time a couple of years ago. And so I think that communicates to me that you're finding some real value in this, and that it's not kind of a one and done. Like, there are opportunities to do it and then maybe do it again in a different context or a little different purpose. So. Okay, I know we're getting all kinds of prompts that we need to speed it up. So this last part, I want to just give everybody, we've got 5 minutes for everybody to just give a quick, like, what's one challenge that you could share about using Science by Design, and maybe one success or a lesson learned, just a couple of sentences. So let's just go in alphabetical order. We'll go, let's see, where are we? We'll go Delisa, and we'll go Demira, Delisa, Kay, and then Zoe.
Okay, yeah. So for me personally, I really enjoyed the Science by Design tool and found so much value in it. As someone who's studying education and child development, I found it so helpful to have like a hands-on guide to follow. One challenge that I had was just finding the time to complete everything on top of my day-to-day workload. But overall, I felt like it was successful because of the feedback and the tools that we gained to improve our programming.
So I'm going to say that I really love the videos, and I love that some of it was self-paced. Even though I have a lot of experience, I love the connection between the science and the doing, and watching the videos, being able to use the videos and other work that we're doing and in this work. So I love that. I love the process of looking through things through the different lenses, and the alignment felt great, and the misalignment was also really helpful. But then having, okay, so what are you going to do about it? So that, to me, the action part of it was so helpful. I thought the workbook was my double-edged sword. I love the workbook. I'm a teacher by trade, so I love a good workbook. I love notes, and I love having to fill things out, right? But I'm with Demira. It was the time factor. It was a little bit intense for me sometimes, and also in my position, just trying to find the time to make sure I could be at the team meetings, to be a part of the process, was sometimes challenging, but a good challenge.
And I would say it very much aligns with what programs often are required to do for funding purpose or accreditation purposes, which is quality improvement, implementation processes that get tested and recorded. So I think it matches. So in that way, it kind of can be built into things that you need to do. I think maybe the only unique thing I could say is that sometimes when you're bringing in a program, they have requirements. And so we had to push back to some of the developers of the parent models and things like that. Like, 15 weeks is too long, for this kind of situation. So making that room for give and take, and often time is often the misalignment, no matter what direction you're talking about.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the time. And I think that's something in echoing what Demira said, but also adding a little our unique, like, because I had the nice perspective of I was able to be the facilitator throughout the process. So I facilitated the first one, and now we're actually facilitating the current years, and we're in unit 3. And it's been really nice to think about, like, how can we make time, but also unique to shelter is there is this time constraint of our families do move out. So our goal is really to take the feedback and use the feedback and let parents see that, or caregivers see that their feedback has been used. And that's really important to us, to not just take their feedback and use it down the road, or take their feedback and not use it at all. Like, we really want them to see that their voice matters and that we're listening. And that makes our time constraint even stricter, because that means we need to do that within 60 to 90 days. And so that's been kind of the challenge of, like, making it a little bit difficult for the team, but also then that ends up having a better effect on the families. And so having that, I think, is part of why we have been so strict on our timing. And I would say this time we spread it out more. The first time we did it in under a month, which was a lot. And so we closed a couple of days of programming to try to make it fit, but I think we learned to spread that out a little bit longer, and that has been really helpful. And then I would say, of course, as Jason and Demira both said, yeah, we're doing it again, and our plan is to do this yearly, because this module isn't just a one and done for us. We have new staff that come, we have new guests, our population changes often. This year we have a completely different population than we did last year, depending on what's happening in the world. So it's really important to hear the guest feedback continually, and to hear what our clients have to say, and to continually make changes. And also, we just decide different focal points, so that helps too. So last time was Tots Club, and now we're doing more focused on the parent connection and that resource connection piece. So it's been really helpful and adaptable to use multiple times.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you all so much. So I'm hearing it's a little bit of a time commitment. So make sure that you maybe you can spread it out a little bit and make room for it. But I think the fact that everybody is kind of doing it again, or planning on doing it multiple times again, I think demonstrates that it's time well spent. So anyway, I just want to thank the panelists for being here today. For audience, please give them some of those emojis for being here and sharing their experience with you. And I'm going to turn it back to Melissa to close us out. Thanks for having us today.
Thank you so much. Many, many thanks to Susan, Jason, Delisa, Kay, Zoe, and Demira for this great conversation today. And even more importantly, for all of your efforts on behalf of the children and families that you are working alongside. It's just such meaningful work that we heard about today, and so great to see your commitment to making the critical services that you provide even better by really prioritizing community voice in your processes. So thank you all so much. Before we close out, I'd like to give everyone in the audience an opportunity to share your feedback on this conversation. On screen, you should be able to access a QR code. There it is. So please, we'll also have that in that link in the survey or in the chat. So we welcome you to share any thoughts and takeaways that you have about today's webinar. Please also be sure to follow our social media channels and subscribe to our newsletter. You can find out about additional webinars and other resources from the Center on the Developing Child there. And finally, thank you to everyone in our audience for being here today. So glad that you spent a little of your time with us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.